Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In old days, like you say, in the decade of the late 70s and all of the 80s, a very interesting new term emerged in the American newsroom lexicon. This was called Afghanistanism. What it meant was, I think it came out of the New York Times, if I remember correctly. What it meant was that editorial page editors or opinion editors, when they were short of ideas on what to write editorials on, wrote one more on Afghanistan. Or when they wanted to, they didn't quite know what line to take on something more urgent or more polarizing or more controversial, you just wrote one more on Afghanistan. So just as you had Afghanistanism then, now you've had the complete reversal of it. Which means today, even when important things happen in Afghanistan, nobody particularly wants to talk about it. So we are talking about the situation in Afghanistan today, just as all of us are getting into the mood for US presidential elections, voting day, and then the counting, etc., etc. But Afghanistan is not a small country. It's not that far from India. It's 4 crore people, 90% of whom live at below $2 a day. It's a very poor country and very violence-torn country. It's also next door to India. In fact, if you look at the map of India, India shares a border with Afghanistan through Wakhan corridor. That is the area generally that Pakistan is now trying to turn into a province. Imran Khan said he'll turn into a province, Gilgit Baltistan. Nevertheless, what's happening in Afghanistan? We've all seen the headlines today that Kabul University was attacked by a bunch of terrorists dressed in Afghan National Army's uniforms, and they climbed the walls of the university campus and just started shooting students. That is the usual method of terrorists everywhere now. You've seen latest in Vienna, that just shoot anybody you come across. But in Afghanistan, there's been a pattern of attacking students, scholars, thinkers, because there is one thing that fundamentalists of any religion dislike many things. But one thing they dislike most of all is scholarship. And second, when it comes to politics driven by religious fundamentalism, they really resent modern education, because their idea of education is what you learn from the clergy, in this case at the madrasa or at the seminary or wherever. So they killed more than 20 students, 20 young bright students, because Kabul is now, Afghanistan is producing very bright young people. That's been a little bit of the peace dividend, relative peace dividend in urban areas of Afghanistan. And many were injured, some were taken hostage. Reports are a little bit sketchy, but this was the big incident. This was also the second attack on an educational institution in a very short duration. So you know something's going on. The Taliban immediately denied that they had anything to do with it, because they, as you know, are now involved in the so-called peace talks, on the one hand with the Americans, on the other hand with the Afghan national government. So Taliban said they had nothing to do with it. Then who done it? By the afternoon, Islamic State of Khorasan, which is what Islamic State calls itself in that region, they said they took responsibility for this attack, saying that they carried out this attack. Now in Afghanistan, who's the Taliban? Who is Al-Qaeda? Who is Islamic State? And who's ISI is usually impossible to tell. And frankly, if you want a safest answer to that, somebody put a gun on my head and said, Shekhar Gupta, give some answer. I'll say all 4 of them are the same thing. Ye sab aapas mein mile hue. Nevertheless, what is the state of play right now? The state of play right now is that these attacks have taken place now on educational institutions, but alongside the numbers and frequency and deadliness of attacks on Afghan security forces have now increased. And they are happening in very distant parts of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a large country, very thinly populated, large country. So look at the map of Afghanistan, the provincial map of Afghanistan on our screen. So the most serious attacks have taken place way in the south, a little bit west of Kandahar, which is the Pakhtun homeland in a way. a little bit to the west of that, in a province called Helmand. Now, Helmand's capital city, which is Lashkar Gah, was nearly overrun by the Taliban very recently. In fact, government forces were not able to defend it. They are losing morale anyway because they know uh, which way is the dice loaded. They know that the Americans now, to get their forces out and to have some semblance or some claim to having restored peace, want to hand over Afghanistan to the Taliban. That surrender has taken place. The Doha talks are surrender talks. I've said this before in a couple of episodes of Katta Clutter, which I'm sharing with you. But really, Zalmay Khalilzad, who's America's ambassador, special envoy, US President, special envoy on Afghan peace talks, is of Afghan origin. But basically, what he's been negotiating with the Taliban at Doha are surrender talks. Surrender by the Americans, थोड़ी इज्जत बचा के, थोड़ी saving their own backs so they can get their people out, and Donald Trump can say, I got my boys out of Afghanistan. That hasn't happened yet, but at last count, if I look at a statement by the US Central Command Commander General McKenzie, it looks like America only has about 4,500 troops left in Afghanistan now, starting with 12,000 at the beginning of the year. Remember, in February in Doha, a commitment was made that within 135 days of signing of the peace accords between the Taliban and the Americans, about 3,500 troops will go back. So that schedule has been kept, but 4,500 are still there. And distrust continues because the Taliban think that Americans will never leave fully, and the Americans and their wards, which is the Afghan government, they believe that the Taliban's commitment to peace is a sham. They don't mean any peace. They mean nothing else. They just want to take over and then once again let loose a reign of violence, terror, and then their own version of Sharia law, and then silence of the kind that Afghanistan saw under the earlier Taliban dispensation. So after these talks took place between the Taliban and the Americans, and we had talked about this earlier, there was a big confusion with the Americans in terms of how do they call these talks with the Taliban, because these were terrorist groups, and Taliban said we are a state. So Taliban actually signed that agreement as Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And Americans went round and round in circles to somehow suggest that this was not a national entity that they were negotiating with, because already Afghanistan had an Afghan government elected under American patronage and under international supervision, etc., etc., etc. So how do you have a government that you recognize in Kabul? Then you have the Taliban and other groups who you consider terrorist groups. Then you negotiate with them, not clandestinely now, not behind the scenes, but now in the open, sign an agreement with them in which they call themselves Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And then you say, ye Emirate hai, lekin Emirate nahi hai. So this was quite nonsensical. But this agreement was finalized between the Americans and the Taliban. Now what happened? When the Americans, the Taliban, signed this agreement, there were many conditions in the agreement, or many deliverables that the Afghan government had to deliver. One of those was release of 5,000 Afghan Taliban fighters, terrorists, militants, whatever you want to call them, who were in Afghan jails, Afghan government's custody. So Afghan government said that this is an agreement between the Taliban on the one hand and Americans on the other. One is a sovereign state, America. Taliban are the Taliban. We are the sovereign state of Afghanistan. So how can an agreement between the Taliban on the one hand and the Americans on the other be binding on a sovereign government of a sovereign state? So we are not bound by this. So once again, Zalmay Khalilzad, who's really been desperate to find this peace, and he's somebody I've in the past described more than once as a conflict entrepreneur. And he is a conflict entrepreneur who now has a great danger of being a failed conflict entrepreneur. And you can see it in his desperation. And what that desperation has led to, please see these two tweets by a gentleman called Anand Arni. These are on the screen, and he says that what you're seeing in Afghanistan now is a detritus of a project that Zalmay Khalilzad had started. Because as part of the project, he said Afghan government released 5,000 of these prisoners, and I will tell you how that happened. And also, he's created this big confusion. He's demoralized the Afghan army, Afghan armed forces, and now you have this almost a kind of situation in which Americans had left South Vietnam or Saigon when they had run away from there. The only difference here might be that the Americans may not need to evacuate their last people from the roof of their embassy by helicopters. They may have a more baizat, as they say, departure or retreat. Now, once Afghan government put up these objections to the Doha agreement between the Americans and the Taliban, they said, Taliban are the Taliban. Who are they? We are the Afghan government. We are not part of it. Then Taliban was persuaded to start another round of negotiations with the Afghan government. So there were two parallel negotiations. One had taken place between the Taliban and the Americans. The second now started between the Taliban and the Afghan government led by Ashraf Ghani. But now what happened? Now Taliban said, "Arey bhai, ye kya sarkar hai? We don't recognize it as a government. We don't recognize this government as a representative of the state. Ye kaun log hain? We are the state, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan." So again, you got fussed. How did you get out of that situation? You told the Afghan government, obviously those guys have no choice but to listen to you, that you set up a committee headed by somebody who's really not a key member of your government in a way, and also or politically or in terms of his affiliations, and also set up a group that is not just of government functionaries. So a 21-member group of negotiators were set up, headed by Abdullah, who's forever been wanting to be president of Afghanistan. Abdullah is a very interesting person. Abdullah represents, in a way, two tribes of Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan is not just a tribal country, it's also a very diverse tribal country. Very often in the popular lore, we think Afghanistan means Pathans or Pakhtuns, because in the past Pathans have been coming to India and they are the dominant tribe. But if you look at the tribal breakup of Afghanistan, so if you just run through the Afghan ethnic demography, 42% Pashtun, 27% Tajik. Now Tajiks are very important because they are not just 27%, but they are in the north. So if you see north of Kabul and you go towards, say, generally Uzbekistan, just visually and in terms of memory, you can then figure it out. Across the Panjshir mountains, which are a big hedge in Afghanistan, then you come to the Tajik area. And Tajiks produced a really redoubtable Afghan commander called Ahmad Shah Massoud. So Ahmad Shah Massoud was a Tajik. One of his key people for negotiations, unarmed, like his ambassador to the world, was a man called Abdullah. Abdullah is half Pashtun. His father was Pashtun, mother Tajik. In fact, his name was just Abdullah. It so happened that it's again a folklore that when he became a minister, a lot of the Western press said you must have a second name. So second name, okay, my first name Abdullah, my second name Abdullah. So he became Abdullah. So he is now leading these talks, and as you may have noticed, he was also in India just the other day, and in fact, he gave India a message, and that's a story you can see on the print.in, that look, you let us talk, but don't intervene too much because talks are at a very sensitive stage. So you know that in this situation, see, in the Afghan situation, what happens? It's winner takes all, first of all. Whoever wins will take everything. So the Afghan government, in choosing Abdullah, maybe also figured that this is ethnically loaded in the sense that he represents Pashtuns as well as Tajiks. And as we know, this lot of the Taliban do not have such roots among the Tajiks. In fact, that country is divided in many ways on tribal basis and on north-south basis. So what did the Taliban did in turn? The Taliban appointed as their chief negotiator a well-known Maulvi and theoretician called Maulvi Abdul Hakim Haqqani. Now, he is a religious scholar. He is like, and he also interprets the law in all the chota courts that the Taliban run in areas controlled by them. So a kind of chief justice of the Republic of Taliban or the Islamic Emirate of the Taliban. So now that he is there, you know that this these negotiations will go in the religious direction. He is being overseen in turn by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, who is the deputy supreme leader of the Taliban. The one side has this supposedly modern Islamic but elected government based on kind of global democratic values. On the other hand, you have this Pakka Maulvis. So I will share with you an article by Mujib Mashal, who is a reputed New York Times correspondent, and in fact will be in India now, will be reporting from here, and we look forward to it. So he says in this article that what you see in Afghanistan now is a clash between two contrary visions. These are two clashing visions. One is the vision of an Islamic theocracy, and other is the vision of a democratic republic. And then on top of this, you have the overhang of so much bloodletting over so many years. And I'm adding this blood feuds, which is so essential, unfortunately, to the Afghan way of traditional Afghan tribal way of life. उसने मेरे से बदला लिया, मैंने उससे बदला लिया. And similarly, then you have family and clan alliances. So, what are the sticking points right now in the talks? There are two sticking points. One is a political one, the second is a religious one. The second actually is more important than the first. The first is that the Taliban say that the basis of the talks, the reference point of the talks, and the only reference point of the talks should be the Doha Agreement between the Americans and the Taliban. The Afghan government, on the other hand, says we were not represented in those talks. So how that can be the sole reference? So we accept that as one of the two references, when the second reference is a resolution of the Afghan or a resolution of a Loya Jirga. Loya Jirga is like a council of tribal elders, tribal chiefs, sponsored by the Afghan government, and also a joint declaration between the US government and the Afghan government. Now, that is not something that the Taliban like very much, because if they accept that, then they accept the Ghani government as the Afghan government. So that is one problem. Although in principle you can say that the Afghan government has pretty much accepted Doha, because even the joint declaration between them and the Americans refers to Doha talks 9 times, but does not refer to the joint declaration that they themselves are signing. But that's a sticking point, political one. Second is religious. And as we know, religious sticking points are often tougher than political sticking points, particularly in a situation like this when both sides are Islamic. It's the Islamic Republic on the one side, it is the Islamic Emirate on the other side, the Taliban. One is the elected government. Now, the Taliban insist that that is Sunni Muslim system of jurisprudence called Hanafi fiqh or Hanafi jurisprudence. Now, I'm not a scholar on Islam, so I have to be very careful not to dare to go too deep into this. But generally, there are 4 broad schools of Sunni jurisprudence. Hanafi school is one of them. It is the most followed in Afghanistan. So the Taliban say that will be the sole reference point for any argument which is on the religious ground. Now, it is very important because this is going to be a religious state. The other side says that, look, if you do that, then this excludes many others who do not follow the Hanafi system. And who are the others? One, Afghanistan has a large Shia minority. I mentioned to you that Afghanistan has 9% Hazaras. In fact, most of them traditionally are Shias, and there are many other Shias. Plus, Afghanistan has many non-Muslims also, including Hindus and Sikhs. So, Afghan government says, look, this will exclude others. The other side says, all right, we accept that. So, maybe for their own issues, Shias can be allowed to use their own jurisprudence, which is Jafri Nikah. But generally, for any argument, Hanafi Nikah will be the touchstone. And who will interpret that? It will be the Maulvis of the Taliban. So that is the second issue. Now, who are the Taliban and where they come from? If you know, I mean, you cannot understand this situation unless you know that really the Taliban the Americans are talking to are people that they've called terrorist organization for a long time. And within them, the dominant group is the Haqqani group, which the Americans are now talking to, which is leading the Taliban now in the talks, which was itself designated a global terrorist group, but which, this is Afghanistan, which almost 45 years ago was an CIA funded American run ally fighting the Soviets. So it was Jalaluddin Maulana Maulvi Jalaluddin Haqqani who founded this group. This was called Hizb-e Islami Khalis, which was one of the most successful Mujahideen group working with the Americans and the CIA in the first Afghan jihad, which the Americans might consider the good jihad. Now, Jalaluddin Haqqani fought then, and then after that dabbled in politics, became a minister for some time, went in, came out, and then became a Taliban supporter. In fact, it was widely believed that he also helped the leading elements of Al-Qaeda escape from the Battle of Tora Bora. In fact, you can see references to this in Peter Bergen's book, The Battle for Tora Bora, that without their help, the Al-Qaeda people could not have escaped. So Al-Qaeda and the Haqqani group have always had close connections. The differences between Al-Qaeda and the Haqqani group or the Taliban. Taliban are now essentially the Haqqani group. The essential difference is that Al-Qaeda wants to spread the glory of Islam or puritanical Islam, as they say it, all over the world. The Taliban and the Haqqani group, they keep their vision confined to Afghanistan and maybe some regions of Pakistan in what is called as the Af-Pak region. So if you want me to use a very crude analogy, it's a bit like Al-Qaeda is the CIA that focuses on the world, and the Haqqani group is the FBI. So that is the group the Americans are now talking to. Now I'll tell you a little bit about the Haqqani group before I conclude this, also because the light is dimming now. These are short days, winter is coming. Jalaluddin Haqqani is a Pashtun. He's from the Mezi clan of Zadran Pashtuns. So why is he called Haqqani? He's called Haqqani because he went to a mosque or a madrasa called Haqqaniya Madrasa or Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, which is located in a place called Akhora Khatak in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan, what used to be called Northwest Frontier Province. Now this Darul Uloom Haqqaniya has an interesting story. This was founded by a man called Maulana Abdul Haq, who used to be a scholar at Deoband, Darul Uloom Deoband in India. After the partition, he went home and his father did not let him come back to Deoband in India. So he set up a seminary there. And in the course of time, this seminary has been described as the University of Jihad because it has produced so many famous jihadis. You want to see its list of illustrious alumni. So there is Jalaluddin Haqqani himself. Jalaluddin Haqqani died in, I think, 2018. Several of his brothers and children, sons were killed in drone attacks and otherwise. Jalaluddin Haqqani is an alum of this university. His son Siraj Haqqani, who's now pretty much the head of the Taliban and the Haqqani group and is leading negotiations with America, has his prize over his head of $5 million, $50 lakh, and yet had his op-ed article published, a big one splashed on the op-ed page of the New York Times, giving the Taliban vision for Afghanistan. He also is among the illustrious alumni of this University of Jihad. There is Mullah Omar, the former head of the Taliban government, and Muhammad Yunus Khalis, who was one of the toughest and the cruelest fighters among the Mujahideen. Then after Abdul Haq, the university, quote unquote, was taken over by a man called Maulana Samiul Haq. Maulana Samiul Haq, and it's an aside, but it's an interesting aside, so I can't miss it. Maulana Samiul Haq got his fame in 1991. By this time, he was a member of National Parliament in Pakistan, highly respected Maulana, Vice Chancellor or maybe Chancellor of the University of Jihad, formerly known as Darul Uloom Haqqaniya. Now, at that time in 1991, Pakistani police busted what they claimed was a brothel in Islamabad. And they arrested its owner, a 35-year-old woman called Madam Tahira. Now, from Madam Tahira, they apparently discovered a diary, as usually happens in our countries, because she said that I had told everybody, because ministers, MPs, top politicians, bureaucrats were my clients. I told them that if I ever get into trouble, I will take all of you down with me. And in that, a name appeared that looked like it was Samiul Haq, and it also said something about his special tastes, which got him the nickname Sammy the Sandwich. In fact, if you Google that name, something will show up in your search. So after that, he had to resign, although he denied all allegations. So he resigned. He left in 2018, as happens with many of these guys. In 2nd November 2018, he was assassinated in Rawalpindi, stabbed multiple times to death. When he died, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government, where Imran Khan's party is very strong, they declared state mourning for a day, and Imran Khan actually said the country has suffered a great loss. So there, this man left. His wards now and people taught by him are now running this Haqqani group, and those are the ones that America is now dealing with.